Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you love it when Oregon's back? Kind of strange this past week, the warm weather and dryness. So I always feel a little sleepy and also a little encouraged by the damp. I think that the moss appreciates it, and many things appreciate it. So today we'll be holding a special ceremony for a memorial for Shakyamuni Buddha that's known as PARINIRVANA. So PARINIRVANA means complete nirvana. So the teaching here is that the Buddha Shakyamuni, upon his awakening, became a Buddha, but there's still the remnants of karma left. And upon the dissolution of his material body, then he entered into a perfect nirvana in which all karmic residue had been resolved. You can think about if you lived at that time and you were studying with the Buddha, your beloved teacher, how remarkable that would have been, and then how confusing and really horrible it would have been to lose his physical embodiment, or at least in the way that you were used to relating to his embodiment. And so the accounts of the Buddha's parinirvana include a lot of sorrow, which is very natural through loss, for sorrow to be deeply part of what we experience. And I believe it's really right that is so. It's not a problem. It's actually deeply important. But this question would have remained for the Buddha's disciples about how to continue living out the Dharma in the absence of their leader, who they could turn to again and again and again for some kind of answer to how to live out what the Buddha had awakened to, and themselves to walk that pathway of awakening to their own Buddhahood, and as Buddhas, not only getting somewhere, but also their own capacity to be a conduit for the Dharma. And many of the earliest explanations we have about Buddhist iconography is so beautiful. It was just the footprints of the Buddha. I've heard there's a shrine in Sri Lanka where they have preserved a footprint or footprints of the historical Buddha, and there's a temple built around, and I would like to go there and visit that someday. But most of the footprints we have is someone carved in stone, or they would make in some way. And that's how the Buddha was, how we were invited to encounter the Buddha. The iconography of absence, just the footprints. I was in Japan in January for some important denominational meetings and traveled to the beautiful city of Kyoto for a couple days. My wife's uncle had passed away last year, so it's a tradition to go and offer incense when you're able to do that. So he had gone to his house, and his wife, my wife's aunt, is still alive, so he spent the night with her. And then the next day we traveled up into the mountains outside of Kyoto to a very old temple named Kozanji, which was founded by a monk named Myoe in the Heian period. That would have been like the 1100s. And they had such a stone, which I'd seen before, but in that environment, Kyoto's a little intoxicating. It's so beautiful. And so you're in a certain mood. And there, among all the moss in this ancient temple up in the mountains, and there are these footprints, much like the footprints that we have on the pillar outside of the front gate. But those are this way, right? You can see them. These are here. There's a stone, and they're here. And as I was looking at it, it was like the whole mountain was able to enter there as the body of the Buddha, because there was no There was no materiality there to fix my eyes on. The whole of being there could come together as the body of the Buddha. And I imagine that this was the practice of our early ancestors in facing the Buddha entering into perfect nirvana. They also built stupas, which you see in many different forms as Buddhism spread throughout the world. But the stupa in its kind of fundamental sense has 5 sections, which refer to the 5 elements of being. And it was considered to be the body of the Buddha. So it wasn't made like iconography to try to look like the Buddha or to look like a human personification, but was a symbol of the presence of the Buddha. Oftentimes inside these stupas, a relic would be enshrined. So maybe a tooth of the Buddha or a fragment of bone or some special material that may have come after an ancestor's was cremated. Sometimes there are these things that are left besides bones. There's also bones, but also these little pearls, and those might be in a stupa. That kind of practice continues today. Several hundred years after the Buddha passed into final nirvana, there was a group of the lineages, the followers of the Buddha, which began to understand something kind of more fundamental about what the Buddha had been teaching, and they started a wave of tradition, which I'm going to loosely call visionary Buddhism. I don't think that's used by scholars all that much, but what do scholars know? The visionary Buddhists, this would have been in Central Asia. So many of you know about the Buddhas that were made into different shape by the Taliban many years ago. Those massive Buddhas that were in Afghanistan. It was that region in which this movement took hold, the very visionary movement. So the building of statues, the iconography of Buddha started to take hold. And we can understand this in different ways. People who are just trying to explain it in a kind of like logical and boring way say that people wanted iconography, so they had to make something else about the Buddha, and then they're going to make these stories and make these pictures of the Buddha. So flat, and not really what was happening through the spiritual aliveness of the time. They had learned to see the Buddha in a different way. Before, they only knew how to see the Buddha as a human being. And then they had to learn how to see the Buddha in the absence of the human being, so that all things could be there and that the practitioners could hold for themselves the practice. But now these visionary Buddhists were able to say, oh, there's another kind of Buddha. There's another kind of Buddha that can be seen. And then we have an incredible flourishing emergence of all manner of sutras that the Buddha is preached at. Really, it's not quite right to say at that time. He always preaches at one time. It's all one time. So that's why at the beginning of a sutra you will oftentimes say, at one time, the Buddha was at da-da-da-da-da-da. That one time is very, very important. And the question that these visionary Buddhists were asking is, what is it to embody awakening? What is the embodiment of a Buddha? What is the body of a Buddha? That's a very interesting question. And that question calls something out in our capacity that we oftentimes miss or we ignore. And that is that our vision is fundamentally free. But we deal with it as if it's contained or it's a containment. We're doing that all the time. We see something, we say, I know what that is. Oh, there's a candle. Right? Let's take it again. Right. It's just so flat. Like we just, boom, I know what it is. Boom, boom, boom. We're containing everything with our, not just our eyesight, but any of our way of experiencing things. It's just like we're putting a lid on the pot. Put a lid, 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 put a lid. And when we ask this question about what is the embodiment of a Buddha, what is those footprints that give us a kind of inclination or an invitation to look in a direction and to open up our sight so that we're not just affixing to an object, but we're allowing the totality of being to be present right here. And then it shows up as things. Shows up as a Buddha, if that's what we need, like the form of a Buddha. Shows up as many, many things. Those are called expedient means. The many ways that the Buddha shows up to teach us, the bodhisattvas, the ancestors. They show up in all kinds of ways to help us, not just our fixed idea of what a Buddha is. So you can see that this is a very profound way to encounter death. Those of you who have encountered deep loss, you know about this. And all of you will encounter deep loss. And so this is something that we have to know, we have to learn to see in this way. When we do that, this other thing happens. And one of the, we could say, most celebrated texts of visionary Buddhism, known as the Lotus Sutra, which is, we study at this temple often, and also is fundamental to the lineages of Buddhism that are coming through Japan, also China and other places, but in Japan the Lotus Sutra became just fundamental, the basis of all the other schools of Buddhism, we could say. And so our school, the Sutra school, which kind of flowed out of a period where the Tendai school was very the dominant form of Buddhism. Tendai Buddhism is completely based in the Lotus Sutra. So we're chanting that all the time, and those teachings are here. So that comes from that question: what is it to embody the Buddha? What ramifications does that have? What is the way that we're seeing? And many of you will know this this chapter of the Lotus Sutra known as the Verse of the Lifespan. We chant it each morning at the temple. And there are these lines: when beings have become sincerely faithful, honest, and upright, with gentle intention, wholeheartedly wishing to behold the Buddha, not begrudging their own bodily lives, then I and the assembled Sangha appear on sacred Vulture Peak. This is the Buddha speaking. This is a Buddha teaching. Like, there's another way to see me, not just holding on to the marks of a physical being. And what's the gateway? Sincerely faithful, honest, upright, gentle intention, wholeheartedly wanting to see the Buddha, wholeheartedly wanting to see the world as a Buddha, wholeheartedly wanting to see a different world. Later in that same sutra, the Buddha's talking about people's experience of living, and he says, my Pure Land is not destroyed, yet all view it as ravaged by fire, so that fear and distress pervade everywhere. The beings vexed with their offenses caused by their unwholesome karma through vast rounds of kalpas hear not the name of the three treasures. Right? The Pure Land is here, but we can't see it because of our karmic afflictions and our habits of pulling things apart. And then he says, but those who practice virtuous deeds are gentle. I love that word comes up oftentimes, gentle. It's an important word. Upright and sincere. These all see that I exist, abiding here, proclaiming Dharma. So say, if we're living like this, if we're exploring this possibility to see in another way, we can't just do that. That's not just a philosophical rearrangement of our thinking. It's a whole way of being. To see in a different way is to be a different way. And the Buddha's absence from being, embodied in that way that we usually think of embodiment, then becomes this invitation. It becomes an invitation to see in a different way. Not just you're going to have a vision of the Buddha, right? You might. For some people, if you're more visionary, you may. And I would encourage you to trust that and to pay attention to it. But don't long for it or try to crave it or try to create it. You know? That's not really the fundamental point. The point is that our vision is free. And one of its ways of showing its freedom is for a golden body to appear before our eyes miraculously. Most people don't have that experience. But some do. That's not the point. Because you have miraculous things everywhere all the time. You don't have to see a golden body in that kind of literal sense to see the unbelievable aliveness of the world and to reform your habit of, I know what it is, and then explaining the world based in what you know. That's boring. You know, for no other reason. It's just more fun to not do that. But it also has a great spiritual effect, not just the kind of joy that comes from it, but also that a different life becomes possible. Seeing the Buddha is to see as the Buddha. And the Buddha seeing is a seeing in which all beings are Buddha. Buddhas see Buddhas. Our seeing of a Buddha is the seeing of Buddha. Seeing a Buddha. And you can go on and on like that. It's kind of fun. It's like the song that never ends, which I won't start because it will become a problem. Yeah. So today, during this ritual, is a simple ritual, much like the other rituals that we do on other occasions. I'll leave the hall here in a minute or so, change my robe. There'll be a procession. There'll be an offering, offering of Dharma words. That's something that the guiding teacher for the ceremony does. In this case, that's me. And it usually has a poem at the end. And so that's usually, that's about some teaching. So you can listen to the poem. And then there's always a shout at the end, and that's to kind of clear out any problems that were caused by the teaching. So, and then some special offerings will be made, and then after that, this is the only ceremony we do this way, the whole assembly will come forward in silence. And the silence is important. It's like those footprints. It's inviting a kind of different type of consciousness. And there'll be a couple of braziers here with some chip incense. You just take a little chip incense and you touch it here to your forehead, and then put it on the charcoals, and then bow, and then you can return to your seat. After everyone's had a chance to do that, then we'll make prostrations as we chant the name of Shakyamuni Buddha. So the chant leader will say Nama Shakyamuni Buddha, Gong will all say Nama Shakyamuni Buddha, and there'll be a bell, and then we'll make a prostration. You can do in whatever way prostrations work for you, do it that way. And then we'll chant the verse of the lifespan chapter, which there are copies here that'll get passed out. And then there'll be dedication of merit. So as you come forward to the altar, two things to remember. One is that's your encounter. You know, there's a wooden statue of a Buddha here, but there's also nothing. So that's your chance to encounter. That's the first thing to remember. The second is to remember there's a lot of people behind you. And so, you can step to the side a little bit, make room for them, or, have your moment. I'm not trying to hurry you along too much, but a little bit. And it's good to just go forward. Sometimes people are very shy. They wait all the way back here till the person leaves. Actually, it should just be like lines that are going up. And so when one person finishes, the next person can go. Yeah. And then after the ceremonies are over, you're welcome to come back and to spend a little time.